Al, how are you, sir?
Jason, doing great. It's a sunny afternoon in Los Angeles, so I've got no complaints. How are you today?
That is good. I am recording live from Charleston, South Carolina, where it is about 50, 55 and sunny.
Okay. Okay.
So, hey, no, neither one of us can complain about the weather for
No,
the most
not at
part,
all.
even though you are showing much more skin than I, with that shirt open like that.
I mean, ever
It's LA,
between,
baby. It's LA,
it,
baby. Right?
listen, between having worked in the tech sector before I went into business for myself, being in California, I feel like everything has just in my wardrobe just gotten more casual over the years. And between that and then the pandemic and everyone coming back and being more casual, this is where we are. But grateful to be
Yeah,
here either
no,
way.
it's good, and the father of a 1-year-old, right? It gets
Yes,
you.
yes.
You have to have that flexibility to move around, have the shirt open, right? All
Oh,
that stuff.
yeah. It's funny the amount of times I have had to change shirts because of food that's come on me or drool or whatever it is. It's having casual t-shirts is definitely the way to go. But it's
Remember
yeah.
those days well. Well, Al D as in the letter D. It is so great to have you on the podcast. I have been lucky enough to be a guest on your podcast before.
Yes.
And you said Jason's here and needs no introduction. I went back and listened to it again. You're someone that needs no introduction as well,
Thank you.
but let's follow the flow of introductions. And I would love to hear about yourself, your background, the growing up in Rochester, New York, the 1-year-old, all the way to, did your parents raise you to be in HR, which I know you have an interesting story about, and how we got here where we are today recording.
I'd love to go through all of that. So today, I am the founder of the Edge of Work, which is my talent and leadership consulting practice. I work with organizations to design programs that develop leaders equipped to lead in today's workplace. And in addition to that, as you mentioned, I am the host of the Edge of Work podcast and newsletter, where I try to cover what's new and next at the intersection of talent, leadership, and the future of work. I've been doing this now for about 4 years, running my solo shop. But prior to that, spent the first part of my career in the management consulting space, something you know very well, Jason, working at the intersection of technology transformation and organizational change. Was always curious about technology, but in that time, I also learned I really was curious about people and organizations. And so was at Deloitte for many years, about 7 years. I did 2 stints there, did a time in business school in between. And then I decided I wanted to go work at the nexus of technology and really work at a company that was building products and services that were changing the way we work. So I spent the next part of my career at Salesforce and working with a lot of organizations who are going through, as you know, digital transformation and trying to better understand how do we actually use these technologies in new ways. And I think the through line through all of that was just this idea that no matter what you're trying to do, if you don't have the right people in the right roles, and if you don't have good leaders who are creating conditions, no amount of technology is ever going to drive the change that you want to see. And so that was part of the reason why eventually I was motivated to go off on my own to do the work that I'm doing today. I live in Los Angeles, California, but it wasn't always that way. As I mentioned to you before we recorded, grew up in Rochester, New York, which is about the polar opposite from Los Angeles, particularly from a weather perspective. So, fun fact, my parents actually ended up in Rochester for a company, Jason, that you will know, but maybe some listeners may not be as familiar with, but Xerox Corporation. For many years,
Now,
Xerox.
why do you say I would know that? Is that an age statement, Al, or
No,
what?
it's an expertise. It's an
And comparing
expertise.
me to your parents, like what is
No, it's an
that? What is
expert.
that
It's
all
just
about?
strictly an expertise in understanding and being in the know of
Okay,
all the great technology innovations that have come through over the past few decades.
the
But
Xerox
they,
machine, one of the best
yes,
innovations we've ever seen, right?
exactly. So they ended up there because of Xerox, which what brought them there, and that's where I was born and raised. And I didn't ever think I was going to get into HR, and I feel like there's a lot of folks who probably can resonate with that. But as I think the Jobs quote goes, you can connect the dots in hindsight. And if I look back at through various points in my career and life, there are so many moments where that have pointed me into the direction that I'm in today. And so it obviously makes a lot of sense in hindsight, but in the moments, I didn't really ever know. Live in Los Angeles with my wife and my 1-year-old son Theo, who is wonderful, and it's just been such a joy to be with. But yeah, it's been quite a journey. But more than anything, just grateful that on a an afternoon, this is part of the work I get to do, is to talk with really awesome people like you.
Thank you. Is he Theo D?
Yes, Theodore D.
What an awesome name. Like
Yeah.
Theo D in LA.
Yes, exactly. His grandfather's name was Theodore, and so that was part of the inspiration for it. But
Could
yeah,
we call him Teddy D? Is that going too far?
no, not at all. I mean, listen, he's young, so there's time to mold for nicknames and whatnot. So that is still very much on the table.
Well, congratulations
Thank you.
on him. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's I was just someone on my team just had a baby earlier today, and I was just saying that, like, as someone who has a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old, that the gift of life is something that definitely
Yeah.
keeps on giving. So
Yeah.
congratulations to you and your
Well,
wife.
this is a quick aside, and you're more than welcome to cut this out if you don't want it. But something that I love, as you know, I follow your work, but something that I love when I open Substack from time to time is I see you sharing it's your son, what
My
he's
older
what he's
son,
writing,
yeah.
what he's writing in podcasts about. And it's I think that is such a gift, and I'm really fortunate that my father's retired but still does a number of things, and we have actually gotten to collaborate on a couple things over the past couple years in particular, and talk about gifts in your life that you never knew you were ever going to get, but you got them. And wow, what a privilege to be able to have that with my father. And so when I see you sharing some of the stuff that he is doing, it resonates with me, because my dad will occasionally, if I share something really interesting, he'll repost it too.
Al, thank you for saying that. It is such a gift. My son, Ben, who's 21, I teach at College of Charleston, a semester, one night a week. And last semester, I was able to have him come and co-teach with me.
Very cool. Yeah.
And the students wanted him more than they wanted to hear from me. So yeah, it is a gift. And, when that happens in life, it's almost like a full circle thing. So thank you for calling that out. Sometimes I
of course.
take that for granted, and it's fascinating. I forget about it, actually.
Yeah.
So thank you for calling that out.
Yeah.
So you are fascinating in that you're kind of in that solopreneur world, which I love,
Sure.
as you know. There's days that even though I work for a large company, I feel like a solopreneur. And because of that, it gives you a lot of freedom to do things that you think are, I'd say, show value to the industry. And, one of the things that you and I connected on was the research that you did in having conversations. And I love the concept of conversations. I truly, someone's going to get mad at me for saying this, but I hate surveys. I love conversations. You've done a great job in capturing the essence of conversations into nuggets that are valuable for our industry. So first of all, before we get into some of those nuggets, I'd love to understand the genesis of your work and what started the drive for those conversations.
Well, thank you. So as we've kind of talked about, part of my work is to work with leaders every day and organizations every day to develop their leaders. And then part of my job is to jump on the mic like we're doing here for my own podcast, as well as to have other conversations with HR and talent leaders across the workplace. And one of the things that I found happening in a lot of my conversations, and maybe you can empathize with this because you talk to a lot of people too, but in those conversations with those talent and HR leaders, one of the top questions that always came up was, hey, I'm curious to know, what else are you hearing from my colleagues who you're also talking to, right? I think it's just natural, right, to be curious about what other people like us are doing. And that certainly makes its way to benchmarking and best practices and all those kinds of things. And I was getting to a point where, I could kind of remember off the top of my head, but because I was having so many of these conversations, I thought to myself, there's got to be a way to maybe take some of the insights I'm gathering and to put them all in one place and to share them all in a way that's a little bit easier to consume than besides what I can just remember off the top of my head. I think the other philosophical reason for why I did something like this was I've always believed in the power of the collective and the power of the profession. I think some of that stems, my father actually worked in the trade organization and association space. And so he advised trade organizations and associations for 30 plus years. And I saw the power, when done right, of how practitioners and people across an ecosystem to come together to advance. And I want to play a role and play the part that I can in doing that. And so there has always been kind of that desire to me of making my small imprint on the profession. And so this is just one of the entrees into doing that. So as you mentioned, I wrote this report, which I'm sure we'll get into, but
We'll
just
be
for
able to link
highlights.
to that also. Yep.
Thank you. It's called Priorities, Perspectives, and Possibilities, What's Top of Mind for Talent and Learning Leaders. We'll put the link in the show notes, but it summarizes some of the key insights I've been learning from about 40 to 50 conversations with talent and learning leaders, VP and above at Fortune 1000 companies, and really gets into, I think, a lot of what these leaders are facing and the opportunities they have in the workplace today, which, there's so many that we can talk about. But yeah, that's a little bit of the summary behind it.
So I'd love to jump into that and start to have those conversations. I'm going to do something a little bit different than what I normally do, which is start with AI, which is kind of what I feel like I've been starting everything with for the last 2 years. And every meeting I've had today prior to this recording has been about it. As someone who's dealing with a situation in Minneapolis, a government, driven situation. And I don't want to make this political at all, but it's a situation. The macro topic is change.
Yes.
The macro topic is change. Now, we could apply it to immigration. We could apply it to AI. We could apply it to aging workforce. We could apply it to value of college degree. We could go down the list, but the macro is change. And I think one of the things, I'm curious actually, that people struggle with is change. And, back in the green room, we were talking about working for large companies doing performance reviews and compensation processes. And most of those processes were designed for a machine era, not AI machine, but people that used to run machines. That worked 8 hours a day and, you did your bell curve and things like that. Managers hate them. HR people hate them. Yet we're still doing it 50 years later. Like, in a world that's changing so fast, I don't think our profession is great at change. And I'd love to know if any of that resonated out of the conversations that you had.
It absolutely did. So one of the very first questions that
Sorry,
I asked,
that was a lot to dump on you. That
No,
was a
not
lot
at
to
all.
dump on you in a question.
No, I love this. And as you know, I'm a podcast host, so I have done this on so many occasions. So it's only fair that I get served a dose of my own medicine from time to time. One of the very first questions I asked in every interview was straight up, what are your top 3 priorities right now? And when you actually distilled those down and broke those down, you got about 120 of them. So many of them were related to change. And in the subsequent conversation, that topic of change came up quite a bit. Now, even before I get into those, I think it's important to remember, or the way in which I often view change is the very same way in which I view human beings. Humans are wired to survive, right? We just are, right? That's how you and I are here today, because of the fact that our ancestors were wired to survive. And I think a lot of times, whether or not change in the totality is rational or bad or good, when the change comes upon us, our very first instinct a lot of times is for that survival mechanism, right? And
I love that. I love that. I love that
Yeah.
take. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's worth a call out, like wired to survive.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean wired to thrive,
Correct.
right? That doesn't necessarily mean wired to celebrate.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean wired to fail either, but survive.
Right. And so with that as a backdrop, I think where this starts to get really challenging is, even as you outlined in the question, is that in particular, the talent and learning leaders and HR leaders that I talk to, they are all in some cases leading or at least contributing to supporting numerous ongoing changes at once. And in some cases, changes have clear outcomes and end states. And in other cases, some don't. And so the backdrop of that, though, again, humans are wired to survive. You have all these changes that you're trying to lead, but then you also have a bunch of other changes where it's not really clear where the end goal is. And so now these people who are wired to survive are then introduced to a whole myriad of change, some of which has ambiguity. And so that just ratchets up, I think, both the challenge and complexity of this all. And that was something that I heard of. I mean, it's tough, right? Because on one hand, and I'm sure you've heard this, and maybe you agree with it, which is great too, which is, people often say there's more change than has ever been before. And I don't know if I can definitively say that that's true or false. But that said, what I can say is that I do think when you put people in positions like a lot of the leaders I talk to, where they not only have to lead change for other people, but when they themselves are actually struggling because they're human with trying to process this themselves, how do you show up for other people when you yourself are struggling with this too? And that was something that a number of leaders openly admitted to me of like, hey, I am leading this thing and I don't know if I agree with it, right? But like, this is my job, so I have to do it. And going back to the AI conversation, I think that one is front and center for that. And whether or not what they agree with it is one thing, but also for that matter, that is so ambiguous and amorphous right now. I think just some of them are just really struggling with it.
Yeah, no, I love the way you frame that. And, Al, regarding change, I'm not here to argue or agree with whether there's more change now than the past. But what I will say is that there is more information and communication
100%.
Than there has been in the past. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, when we take that in, it feels like change.
It does.
So the fact that we can't do anything or go anywhere in the world without getting hit with a watch or a smartphone or an iPad, like I've got 7 devices sitting here. I can't go anywhere without getting hit with a change every second, which has a direct thing to your brain, which denotes change, which brings on change fatigue or change dopamine, whichever way you want to say it. I think that whether there is more change or not, which I think there is, it definitely feels like there's more change.
Sure.
And is fatiguing.
It is. And to a certain degree, to your point, perception is reality. And so whether or not it's true or not it doesn't really matter if that's what people feel, because how they feel will certainly impact how they show up and the actions that they take. And so whether or not there is more or less, the point to a certain degree is a little bit moot. The one thing I will say to add to that, and I'd be curious about your experience, particularly for large organizations, I don't have hard data on this, but it does often feel like when I started my career in management consulting, it was very rare to see a company going through multiple transformation projects or numerous transformation projects all at once. I do feel like the expectation for what larger companies are expected of in terms of the metabolism of change that they're supposed to take on, it does feel like more. And I'm sure we could pull consulting firms for folks who have been around for a while to see what they have to say about that. But it does anecdotally feel like that is true. And I again, whether or not, again, hard data matters or not, maybe that point is moot.
Well, no, I mean, Al, I don't know. I mean, I don't have hard data where, once again, I hate surveys, but I'll tell you that, that I think if you're not transforming as an enterprise right now, you're hospice.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. It's a necessity.
So I don't actually think that there's a choice. So, all of that being said, what are the drivers of that, which I think gets us into that AI topic once again. And I would love to talk about AI as a mindset and a change more than a technology from this for the specific conversation. But so how are you seeing talent? Because I mean, once again, with AI, we've got talent leaders who are like, oh yeah, we're creating courses 7 times faster. And oh yeah, we're able to, double check our work and see who's taking what from a SOP standpoint 3 times faster, which is all cool. I mean, it's all automation plays. I'm curious as to the work that you were doing in the conversations. If you heard that as an automation play, or you heard it more as a massive work design shift?
It's a good question. And the answer actually is the reason why the mindset conversation is a conversation worth having. Most of the insights that I've gleaned so far have been in the automation bucket, right? Or broadly speaking, we'll just call it efficiency bucket. And I think
that's the easiest. I think that's the easiest part, right? It's like, that's the lipstick on a pig. Let's take a pig. Let's get some lipstick at Sephora. Sorry. let's put it on the lipstick, let's put it on the pig and be like, oh, cool. Now I'm got a pig with lipstick.
Right. And to try to put myself in the shoes of some of these leaders sometimes, if you're getting pressure to show some kind of business value or ROI, that's probably going to be your go-to move because it's something that you feel comfortable with. And it's also something that you can use the current mindset you have to be able to do and probably do reliably or effectively. But the broader work design, that transformation, that's a new mindset. And so that's just a much harder bridge, I think, to cross, right? In terms of actually being able to make that leap. But in some cases, and this is the nuance, and this is why, to your point, conversations could be so valuable. I did talk to leaders who very much want to do what you're talking about in terms of the work design, in terms of actually using AI as an opportunity to sit back and say, hey, maybe we haven't been doing things perfect for the past 2 to 3 decades. Like maybe this is an opportunity to work in a new way powered by technology. But they still are in an organization that has process, that has organizational norms, that has organizational debt, that has a way of operating. And those things just don't magically flip the switch either. And so even within kind of the conversation of, are we using this for efficiency versus are we using this for work design? There's almost a third pillar in between, which is I see the value in crossing the chasm and I just can't do it in my company just yet. And I do wonder though, particularly to the point you made about just the need to transform or else ending up in hospice, if we'll be able to move the Overton window on that within the next 12 to 18 months, because I think the reality for some organizations in some industries, that might be the best option for survival. So
I love that point. Let's push on that for a second and talk about, if you heard anything about middle managers. Because for me, Al, one of the things if someone said, what's your most common question you got asked in 2025, I'd say, whose responsibility is this?
Yeah.
That's the number one question I got in 2025 is whose responsibility is this? And, of course, as a management consultant, what's my answer? It depends. I didn't have a great answer for it, but I do think that in most cases, the answer hasn't been middle managers and the answer hasn't been close enough to the employee.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think the last piece of it to the last thing you said there, close enough to employee, in theory, I think that's why the manager and particularly the middle manager is so important. As an average everyday employee, the person who you're most proximate with respect to the organization is going to be your people manager, right? And you are probably, for better or worse, going to look at them or towards them in terms of what are they saying, what are they doing, and what are they rewarding. So I think if you want to see anything come to life in your organization, if you overlook that role, you are severely limiting your ability to get the change or the outcome or the objective that you want. I think the challenge also has been that in this weird way, we have been very good at overloading managers with things, just not perhaps always the right things. And we don't ever also take anything off the plate.
That was way too nice. Like not necessarily the right things. I'd say 50 to 70% of it is not the right things.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that is where a lot of times the hang up is that we have this great resource or this great opportunity, this great vessel, if you will, right? That people have the ability to see and to look towards in each and every day. And either we don't use them at all or we don't give them the right resources to actually do the things that we need them to do. And so, yeah, like that comes up quite a bit. I think as a parallel to that, I think what it also speaks to though is for these, particularly around AI, this is not a solo mission, right? This is a systemic solution. And if you think you're going to go it alone, I don't necessarily know if that is you're going to have enough steam to be able to get the outcomes that you want. And so if anything, it's overlooking a really, really critical lever that you have to be able to really make this effective.
And I know that I know we've had this conversation before that shifting the organization and shifting the role of work is not IT's job.
Right.
IT's job is to enable from a technology standpoint, and unfortunately, AI is seen as technology. So way too many organizations put that weight on the IT or technology team, which gets me into probably the second question that I was asked most about in 2025, which is that under this category that I personally hate, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, called reskilling.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
the only reason I hate it is because it's amorphous.
Yeah.
There's is that when you're saying reskilling, are you changing mindsets? Are you, someone said, hey, we're reskilling. We got prompt training for people on how to write prompts in ChatGPT. I mean, we're talking about a spectrum. Sorry, that's very, very broad when it comes to reskilling. And I'm curious as to, in those
Yeah.
conversations, if that came up.
It does and did. And one of the questions that I did ask those leaders was around what is your role within AI, the AI conversation in your organization. And so one of the top things that did come up was either in AI adoption or AI enablement or upskilling. So as a matter of what are people doing, it did come up. But as a broader kind of conversation to be had, I think you raise a really good point. It's really interesting. I think sometimes, well, I think what's really interesting is that one of the, I think, unique perspectives that I have is that I spend time with talent and learning, but I also spend time with other parts of the organization. I think you do as well. And it is really interesting to me as an observation. IT is a really good example, which I know you know well, particularly working at the intersection of technology and HR. If you talk to folks in IT right now, they have lots of challenges when it comes to things like what we're talking about with upskilling and reskilling and things, because software development and product management is changing so rapidly and so quickly. And the people who are succeeding right now are really the ones who are proactively upskilling or learning and working in new ways. And so to a
On
certain
their
degree,
own,
on their
probably.
own, right.
On their
Right.
own, not
Sure.
through going through a corporate training class or anything like that.
But if you talk to IT leaders, they would be the first to tell you, like, yeah, like we need help, right? Like we want, we can have 5 or 10 people who are like this. We would love 50 or we would love 100, right? We need help doing this. But then you go and talk to folks in the talent and learning space, and a lot of them have the best of intentions of wanting to do the same kind of work. And somewhere in there, there isn't always that overlap, right? And I think that's worth exploring. And I think some of it maybe gets to just internally in organizations. Sometimes there are just dynamics that are such that just make it hard for this stuff to happen, either in terms of how an organization perceives learning or how they define upskilling or reskilling. But I think what actually I want to talk about is something that a chief talent officer who I interviewed, who I really, really respect, brought up to me, which was, when I asked her this question about, what do you think about upskilling and reskilling? She kind of laughed and she said, well, like, what's the point? Like, what's the point when, the models aren't perfect today, but between the models and reinforcement learning, what happens when the machine learns feedback faster, takes your feedback, and doesn't complain about it quicker than anyone will ever be able to upskill, right? Like, what do we do then? And for me, when I think about that comment, I don't know if what she's saying is going to be 100% true, but I could see the elements of it being true. But it brings up a broader conversation, I think, to be had to what you highlighted is what is the definition of this and what is this ultimately for? Because if we spend a lot of time and energy over the next 2 years upskilling people on a bunch of skills and capabilities like prompt engineering, that ultimately aren't going to matter because we're all just going to be using voice and prompts aren't going to be a thing. Well, then what are we doing this for? Right. And I think that is the conversation that needs to be had, which ultimately maps back to why are we even asking our organization to focus on AI adoption and enablement? And just sometimes in a lot of organizations, just the lack of clarity outside of we know we need to do this, but we're not really clear what it is. And so, yes, the conversation definitely came up, in both in terms of tactically what people are trying to do, but also some people were thoughtful enough to raise the philosophical question about what is the actual role, just knowing and being clear-eyed about what some of this technology can do today, and knowing that this is not the end of this is not the end of it. This is just the beginning.
There's Along those lines, in the upskilling, reskilling space, and one of the reasons I teach in higher education is because I'm trying to make a difference at that level, which leads into work. But I'm curious, and almost every client just started another semester last week, and at the start of a semester, right now, there's massive fear in juniors and seniors in college about are they going to be able to find a job, and is what they're learning in school helpful to find a job. I don't want to talk about that particular thing, but what I am curious about is, did you hear any fear in these conversations that, hey, is our function going to be obsolete? Or because to me, there's the,
Yeah.
how do I play not to fail, and how
Sure.
do I play to win? And I see a lot of organizations and organizational leaders playing not to lose versus playing to win. And I'm curious as to if that maybe they didn't say it out loud, but if it came out at all.
It's a great question, and I love that distinction. So I'll say a couple things. So the first thing I would say is that there's absolutely fear, for sure. And some people were definitely very open to admit that. And I really do appreciate that, because it's a very real,
It's a
reaction.
human emotion, and it's important to be honest with it. Yeah.
Right. And to a certain degree, I might actually have some more questions if someone was 100% fearless about it, and maybe they might be missing something. But absolutely there was fear. I think to your point about, I was thinking about it in terms of offense versus defense, but I like the way that you framed it in terms of, is this out of fear, or is this out of being more proactive? I do see people who are proactively recognizing that if I don't think about how I need to evolve and do my job or role or profession differently, or if I just keep doing, basically, if I keep doing the same thing that I'm doing in my role today and not considering the impacts about AI, or not trying to think or work differently, I know I'm going to be put at a disadvantage. And so they are proactively going out of their way to be able to put themselves in a better position, regardless of what happens, to succeed. That definitely came up in some of the interviews I had at the individual level for individual leaders. Where it gets tricky is that happening either for leaders thinking about the broader profession that they're in within talent or learning, or at least locally within their organization? There isn't as much of that happening yet. And it could be just because this is the adoption curve and we haven't gotten there yet. It could be out of fear of, well, what if I'm wrong? Or what if I don't get the support I need to do this? But I definitely think that for you, the individual I was interviewing at the individual level, they were absolutely thinking about it in terms of, even for maybe people who were a little more pessimistic about how AI is going to change. Like they weren't full doomers, but they definitely were not accelerationists. They understood, I know this will look different. I've got to figure out how to evolve. But I don't know what it would take. Like, I think one of the questions I always come back to is the magic question, which is, what would it take, right? Like, let's just assume for a second that we did have more leaders who were proactively thinking about, hey, how do I get ahead of this? How do I make sure I can overcome my fear and put my company in a better position by proactively upskilling and engaging and trying to get the rest of my organization to do this? Like, what would it take to actually do that, right? I think it would take a little bit of courage. I think it would have to take some systemic thinking in terms of, how do I think broader outside of just me or my team to get others involved? It would have to be, I think, also people looking out for more than just the short-term time horizon, right? Which realistically is hard to do sometimes when you've got OKRs and KPIs and shareholders and things like that. But I think that's ultimately what's going to have to take to really, I think, wake up and collectively start to be more proactive about putting ourselves in a better position. Because, and I don't know if you feel this way, but the way that I've been thinking about this is that, let's just say I do nothing, right? If I don't upskill, if I don't take it seriously, that if I don't evolve, that I will be in trouble. I could get left behind, right? Or nothing could happen. But let's say that I do choose to upskill proactively and evolve. Again, if things do change, I will be in an advantageous position. But let's just say AI just fizzles out, which I don't think it will, but let's just say that it does. well, I'll still have taken agency and I'll still have put myself in a better position to be a better, more effective worker leader anyway. And so my view on this is like, well, I would rather put myself in that position because the other side of that bet is just not a bet I'm willing to want to take. And so I
Yeah.
think, yeah,
No, I love the way you said that. I love the way you phrased it. And I think that, the agency piece of it is really, really important.
right.
Like I've made a goal in 2026 to write an app or build an agent every day.
Mhm.
Um,
I love that.
Now I'm
Love
day
that.
14 today, already done with today. As
Great.
you know, in many excuse me, in many people, the 19th of January is
Is
called
the
Blue
magic
Monday
day.
on
Yes.
purpose because that's when most people give up their
I know.
habits per
Yeah.
se. But for me, I've gotten so much out of the 14 days that there's no possible way I could.
Yeah.
Um, uh, because of what it's taught me, not necessarily what it's tied to building agents, but what it's got me thinking different when it comes to work and humanity. And,
Yeah.
there's a new, we're recording this. There's a new tool that just came out
Yes.
yesterday
Nice.
called Claude Cowork.
Yes.
And I was having a conversation with my 21-year-old last night, the same one that you mentioned earlier. And he's like, are you worried about your son? And I was like, you? He's like, no, your 18-year-old. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like this knowledge work, it's all going to be gone. And I'm like, dude, it's such a 21-year-old comment, A, B, who by the way doesn't have the parentheses around slow when it comes to enterprises and how slow they are to move. But at the same time, he's right that a
Yeah. He
lot of the
is.
stuff that we do
Mhm.
is going to be done better by a machine. So, I don't. What are your thoughts on that? Like, are we moving into a world where we're going to work 4 days a week because the machine's going to be doing stuff for us? I right now have 14 agents running, doing stuff for me.
Yeah.
But a year ago, I would have nothing running while I was recording a podcast, and I would be 1/14 as productive. That's probably not the
Right.
right ratio, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. To your point, once you start building with these things, it can often be amusing sometimes to look back at how you used to do things or how you, in some cases, still do some
It's
things
embarrassing.
to see how we have worked. So there's one side of this, which is I think once you start building with these things, it's hard to see yourself going back. I think the other side of this, of course, is that um, if all of business is just ones and zeros and deterministic outcomes, well, then what are we even doing, right? Like if it's all just 1 or 0% companies of agents doing stuff, well, like what is this? What is this? What are we even here for, right? And so,
Whoa, Al, this is a whole nother episode. But you're right. No, you're exactly right.
all right. I mean, I go back again, like I try my best when I can to anchor on history and psychology and other things. But if we think about why does business or commerce even exist? Well, it exists because, back in the day, Jason had fire, Al had water, and our friend over there, Jess, had food. And we all needed one of the other things, but we didn't have those other two things. And so we got together so that we could survive. Right. And like fundamentally, like I'm oversimplifying a lot, but fundamentally we did that and we did commerce because it connected us together. Right. And so my view on this is that I think there is an element of business and commerce and corporations that is still about connection and about humans. And so I don't necessarily think we will get to a world where it is just ones and zeros because I don't necessarily think that was ever in the DNA of why a company or a business formed. That said,
So,
I think, yeah,
so
go ahead.
yeah, go. No, well, no, I would love for you to, because one of the things I read in your report is this quote from a leader, and it ties into this, and I want to make sure we can tie it into that.
Yeah.
Our greatest value remains deeply human. AI won't replace that, but it can amplify and scale what helps us deliver our unique value.
Yeah.
So along those lines, if you're guiding Theo,
Yeah. Yeah.
long way to go, but
Yeah.
if you're guiding Theo to how to, like, what are the skills, capabilities, traits,
Yeah,
as you and I talked about the other day, like to remain human? What do you tell people?
great question. So I think the first thing would just be um, deep curiosity. Um, Again, going back to the amplification thing, AI is an incredible amplifier, but it's even better when it's pointed in the direction of a human's curiosity, interest, or problem to be solved. And so I would love for him to be deeply curious about the world and to find ways to use that in the everyday interactions. I think for sure, and I'm not the first person to say this, but just honestly, the ability to talk to other people. And there's certainly an element of curiosity that goes into that, but also just, I just think the ability to quickly build trust with another human being, I don't think that's ever going to go out of style. And definitely today in today's environment, I think is really, really important, regardless of what level in the organization that you sit in or where your walk of life or what have you. So deep curiosity, trust and connection. I think a third would be discernment and the ability to use that noggin up here to be able to make personal judgments about things. Using what you think is right or wrong or just or unjust or however you want to frame it. And then I think the last thing would be this just whether you want to call it learning agility or experimentation or whatever, but just that ability to just embrace knowing that there may come a time when you will need to learn something new. And that can be challenging and hard and maybe not always what you want to do, but that you have the capability to do it and to evolve over time as things evolve. And so if I were to pick four, those would be the ones that I would really focus on.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And, as a solopreneur, it's probably
Yeah.
something you're doing every day,
It is. So
right?
I'm a little biased, but yes, it is. It very much is. And so I think it's definitely ingrained in that for sure. But I do think it widely could be applicable for a lot of people, but absolutely for the work I do each day.
So, just in closing, I'd love to hear what's next. Like, not that what you've done isn't enough, but what are you working on next? And
Yeah.
what are the types of things that you do, that the listeners can, reach out and talk to you about or be on the lookout for you?
Thank you for asking. So all of those human skills that I just mentioned, a lot of those are the skills that I focus on developing within leaders and organizations. So if you're trying to develop leaders with lots of skills like that to be able to lead effectively in today's workplace, that's one of the ways in which you might be able to engage with me or learn more about my work. As an extension of the report that we have been talking about, I'm going to continue that, and I'll actually be releasing another one over the summer, which will really start to drill in specifically into two of those themes, which is really around the future of the talent and learning profession, as well as AI. And the last thing I would say that I'm spending time on and will continue to kind of would love to engage with anyone who is doing interesting things in the space or looking for someone to come talk to about this stuff in the space. But that topic around change has really stuck with me. And look, like we've changed since the beginning of time. And so to a certain degree, sometimes it feels like there's nothing new under the sun. But I've been thinking a lot about a lot of what those leaders said about how really they need to show up and really lead change while they themselves sometimes are navigating their own personal tensions with it. And so I've been spending a lot of time writing, researching around this and talking with leaders who are going through this right now, because I'd like to try to build something around that. I'm still figuring out what that looks like. But if that's something that resonates with you or something you're experiencing, please hit me up. I would love to hear what you're challenged with.
I love that. I think that, and it goes back to curiosity. Like to me, curiosity is not
Yes.
what you're willing to learn, but it's almost what you're willing to give up.
Mm.
And,
Yeah.
I think I think a lot of people are open to learning, but I think a lot of people are struggling with change.
Yeah.
And when that comes back to the way you just phrased it, I think that's a human element.
It is.
It's not a technology element. Technology can help, but
Yes.
it has to start, as you said, mindset is the principle in your report. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where this whole thing starts.
Indeed.
Well, Al, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. Fun conversation. Have to do this again.
Likewise.
as the world changes and the speed changes, would love to have you back. And especially as you do the next bit of this conversation gathering, love to talk more about it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. It's been a privilege.
Good. Thank you, Al. Take care.